Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this first event in our Sustainability in Action series. I'm Vanessa Matzay, National President of the United Nations Association of Australia Young Professionals Network. On behalf of the United Nations Association of Australia and the entire Young Professionals Network, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that we meet tonight from many traditional lands across Australia. Here in Sydney, I find myself on the traditional lands of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. I would also like to respectfully acknowledge the leaders of these lands, past, present, and emerging, and pay tribute to at least 60,000 years of history and knowledge held by First Nations Australians as the original scientists and guardians of the lands, waters, and ecosystems across Australia. There is still so much to learn about our own scientific history, and we are committed to doing so as part of the UNAA's work. Before we start, I would like to encourage our viewers to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands from which they are joining tonight in the chat function, so we can all continue learning. I'm delighted to be launching our first National Young Professional Series in recognition of 2021 being the United Nations International Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development, which highlights a need to promote sustained and inclusive economic growth and to foster innovation and provide opportunities, benefits, and empowerment for all. Especially during a global pandemic, the creative economy is more crucial than ever to support entrepreneurship, stimulate innovation, and employ particularly young people and women. In doing so, it not only attracts investment, but it also preserves and promotes cultural diversity. To learn more about how the UN is working with member states to drive creative development, I encourage you to follow the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, who have shared a calendar of activities on their website, and which we will have linked in the webinar chat. We developed a series driven by the idea that we all have a role to play towards sustainable development, and that with our choices, we shape our personal contributions as individuals, we shape market trends as consumers, and government policies as voters. Even in our workplaces, there is an opportunity to influence habits by creating awareness and championing small changes that prove more sustainable improvements are possible. I believe that the single most important thing about sustainability is to understand that it is not a standalone or separate topic. Implementing sustainability is necessary and vital to every single aspect of our lives. As the word suggests, without it, humanity will not be able to sustain itself and thrive into the future. So given sustainability is relevant to all facets of our lives, from the food we eat, the cars we drive, the clothes we buy, and the way we consume energy, it can be overwhelming to define what it actually means to be sustainable. With this in mind, the UNAA Young Professionals Network have put together a 6-part event series with the aim to break down and explore what sustainability means on an actionable level within our communities, our homes, and our day-to-day lives. To launch our series tonight, we will be discussing how closing the loop and establishing a circular economy is a key component of implementing sustainability. The current way we produce, use, and dispose of our goods is rapidly depleting our planet's natural resources. Since the Second World War, production and consumption globally have risen enormously, especially when it comes to environmentally harmful materials. A report by the World Wildlife Fund in 2019 found that the production of virgin plastics has increased 200-fold since 1950 and grown at a rate of 4% a year since 2000. A circular economy demands considering the social and environmental dimensions of value chains, thereby establishing an industrial system that is regenerative and restorative by both intention and design. Circular thinking needs to replace the typical representation of value chains, which is linear, where the product is discarded and disposed of at the end of the value chain. It's easy for a company to market a product as sustainable because it doesn't come in a plastic container. But it is important that we as consumers demand transparency throughout the value chain, which starts with raw materials and includes everything from processing and manufacturing to transportation, retailing or service provision, and ends with how we as consumers can dispose of waste. An industrial system which is shaped by circular thinking allows for that waste to be reused, recycled, and recovered, but also uses renewable energy and eliminates toxic chemical use. At its core, a circular economy aims to eliminate waste through redesign and calls for strict differentiation between consumable, and durable components of a product. Ultimately, closing the loop requires a superior design of materials, products, and business models. And that is exactly what our incredible speaker for tonight's event is doing through her work. We are very excited to be joined by Professor Veena Sahajwalla, an internationally recognized materials scientist, engineer, and inventor, revolutionizing recycling science. She is renowned for pioneering the high-temperature transformation of waste in the production of a new generation of green materials, and is the inventor of polymer injection technology, an eco-friendly process for using recycled tires in steel production. In 2018, Professor Veena launched the world's first e-waste microfactory, and in 2019, she launched her plastics and green ceramics microfactories. Professor Veena is a director of the Australian Research Council Industrial Transformation Research Hub for Microrecycling, a leading national research center that works in collaboration with industry to ensure new recycling science is translated into real-world environmental and economic benefits. Professor Veena has also been appointed hub leader of the National Environmental Science Program, Sustainable Communities and Waste Hub, working with research institutions and many industry, government, and community stakeholders to reduce the effects of plastics and other waste, support sustainable people, environment interactions, and offer solutions to minimize impacts of hazardous substances and pollutants. Before we kick off, I would like to take the time to thank Jackie Reed, our National Programs and Events Executive, for developing the series, and all the teams across the country who are making it possible. A special thanks also to Joel Lindsay and our leadership team for being instrumental in putting together this event. As you will have seen, we have an exciting Q&A section, so please share any questions you have for Professor Veena in the Q&A function for them to be addressed later. And now I'm very excited to hand over to Professor Veena. Thank you so much for speaking with us tonight. We can't wait to hear more about your incredible work.
Thank you very much, Vanessa, for that very kind introduction. And I really wanted to take this opportunity to actually congratulate you guys on, what a fantastic thing to do to talk about sustainability at the level of action and practice. And all of us, of course, who are committed to taking on sustainable principles in our lives also want to know how we might be able to put things into practice and do it in a way that makes sense for all of us. So, in that regard, of course, ultimately, if we are going to talk about the big picture and understanding, how we go about implementing new ideas, we do realize, of course, that all actions have to be taken by all of us, regardless of whether we are individuals as citizens, or whether we might be working in a professional area, or indeed having the opportunity to be able to make a difference in the places where we work. So regardless of how this action could well be deployed, I think for us it's important then to understand how we actually can imagine a future world where, of course, we've ideally seen elimination of waste, because we actually can deploy and redeploy waste into manufacturing. So this is why, of course, I talk about aligning recycling and manufacturing as part of our thinking, which means, of course, we've got to understand the entire value creation of materials and goods that we consume, and thinking about sustainability in that way. So focusing very much understanding of how regional, local solutions can actually be deployed may well be an important way for all of us to embrace what is practical and doable and of the right scale. And this is why, of course, some of the solutions that we are developing, which is built around our microfactories, are really showing that we can create value-added materials. We can actually do that by understanding new ways to bring about manufacturing in our local economies. So really, if you start to imagine some of the products that we all use in our everyday lives, and whether we take public transport or indeed, drive our own vehicles, one thing will never go away is the need to actually have tires. And so, if you start to look at all the everyday items that we don't think about much, but then also in a way are essential part of our lives, of course, then once you open up that question, what else is out there? You can certainly, even something as basic as a car. Yes, the metallics are recyclable, but what happens to the non-metallics, plastics and tires and glass and so on? So these are the kinds of challenging questions that we do need to ask. So when we think about automotive waste, it means that from our perspective, it's an opportunity to actually start to challenge the notion that, oh, well, we can only recycle metals, but all this other stuff, tires and all of this is too difficult, and plastics, and it'll all end up in landfills. So, if we start to take that approach, then of course we're not doing enough. And I think, to me, that's really the key sort of way to think is, we do need to address what is considered as, oh, too difficult to recycle, or it's too hard basket, or it's non-recyclable. And I think, to me, this is where, of course, we need to challenge the norm that perhaps we need to work harder. We need to work together collaboratively so we can bring in science and business and communities and really bring about what is possible at the practical grassroots level. Something as important as making of steel, in this particular case with our green steel technology, where we're using waste tires, allows us to actually show that we can reduce our consumption of coal and coke, and at the same time produce steel for various applications. So these are all things that are not only doable, but also showing that science can in fact be translated into practice. But we do need to have, of course, industries and collaboration across research and industry sectors playing a part. So what that then means is that it's not enough to think about traditional recycling of converting like for like. We have to be really innovative in the way we imagine all kinds of resources being converted into valuable materials and products, and can be brought back to life over and over again, and preferably reducing our transport mileage. So it's not about sending products over long distances away to some other place where it becomes somebody else's problem, but rather thinking about it in a local and a regional setting, so we can actually all think about practical solutions that can be deployed at various scales. So that's the other important point. It's not always about economies of scale, but rather thinking about economies of purpose. What is the purpose and what we're trying to achieve and what we're trying to deliver in terms of our UN SDGs. So our goals to achieve sustainability means that we need to rethink and reimagine what our resources are going to look like in the future. I mean, is this a pile of waste or is it a pile of resource? And I think, again, when you start to ask the question about e-waste or electronic waste, again, how can we possibly call this, as a waste material when it's actually rich in metals in this particular case, and some of the other valuable non-metallics that are present in our boards, circuit boards that we see in front of us there. But how do you actually transform this from a waste into a resource is by actually imagining how you might at a micro scale, and our microfactories are doing exactly that, transformation of waste into valuable metallic alloys is absolutely feasible and possible. So the science is all there. We've published a lot of this work, but the real important step moving forward for all of us will be, how do we actually convert science into practice, is by imagining new technologies. And in this case, the kind of work that we're doing with our microfactories is about conversion of a lot of these types of resources. So if they are no longer waste, then they have to be resources that can be channeled into producing value-added materials. And in this case, we're talking about metallic alloys that can be harnessed from our boards. All of this can be done, of course, on a micro scale, and achieve economies of purpose in that we can create useful alloys that are fit for purpose. So that's the other thing, what is the purpose? And of course, from an engineering and a scientific point of view, are we achieving those goals of making our products that are right for purpose from a chemistry point of view, from a point of view of putting it back into practical applications? And then, of course, once you start to open up a whole range of possibilities, even in our electronics world, it's not just about the devices that we'll talk about that contain circuit boards, for instance, but in this case, we're talking about batteries. How do we actually know that we're actually harnessing all of these batteries that we use in our everyday lives appropriately. Are we simply just, using it and throwing it away into landfill, or are we indeed doing the right thing in not just collecting it, but also reimagining ways in which potential future manufacturing solutions on a micro setting can allow us to bring forward a lot of these valuable materials that are locked away in our batteries. For example, if we're talking about whether they are lithium ion batteries or indeed many of the other ones that are non-rechargeable ones, but potentially contain very important materials that can be harnessed. And a lot of these materials can then be put back into practical applications. But the important question is, can we actually develop science to the point where we know that we're getting, materials out that are of the right quality? So again, it comes back to knowing how do you go about harnessing these materials so that we can indeed generate products and outputs that are of the right quality, fit for purpose, so that we can all make sure that when we are thinking about all kinds of materials that are critical to our economy, that we can indeed find a lot of these resources that are currently, of course, put away as waste or might be too difficult or sent somewhere else for processing. I think it's very important that we start to reimagine and rethink and have a complete shift in our mindset, because if we can harness a lot of these materials locally in different parts of the world, imagine how we could then care for our planet, but also equally importantly, create jobs. And of course, we can do that because a lot of these materials are economically and of course, from a manufacturing perspective, extremely valuable materials, for the fact that so many of our devices and solutions that require energy storage depend very much on the availability of these types of critical material feedstocks. And therefore, we can imagine a future whereby a lot of our end-of-life devices and products that contain valuable materials, as you see in this particular table here, that can then be put to use, because they can then be harnessed, and you can access these important materials and you can put them back into new battery and other energy storage devices. And we have to do that because we do know that a lot of these valuable metals that we're talking about that are present in our spent batteries are indeed, of course, still very valuable. Just because a battery or a device stops working or has fallen apart, as no longer fit for use, doesn't mean that the materials that it contains is no longer useful. In fact, the materials could well be harnessed. The question is, how do you actually convert a lot of these used materials and bring it back to life again? And this is where, of course, thinking about materials and supply chains means that we can all participate in these supply chains right at the first step, where a lot of these devices and products come into our hands. How do we process them? How do we then harness these materials? How do we actually refine these materials so that they are of the right quality, right performance, and they can be put back into application again? And this is really, of course, the question for us in showing that science, technology, and practice can all come together. So a lot of our work that we are doing, supported through the Australian Research Council MicroRecycling Hub, is very much about that. That research has to have ultimately a groundbreaking solution that is fit for purpose. So depending on the nature of the batteries, depending on the volumes, depending upon, of course, what do you want to regenerate? Can we regenerate the exact same metal, or do we have to regenerate some other type of material out of that, is an important question. So this is where, of course, partnerships with industry and research is indeed important. And ultimately, from our point of view, this is exactly what we're doing in hosting this hub at UNSW, the Smart Center, where we bring together research collaborators from across the country. We look at not just recycling and understanding the materials, but we also then have to go back and look at how we might be able to create new technologies, new solutions, and translate that science into practice. So this is where, in this case, the science of microrecycling is so important, that we keep in mind, always a front and center of mind, that when we create new materials and when we regenerate new materials from our end-of-life products, that they are always going to deliver the right quality. And that is also something we need to challenge ourselves and say that it's not always obvious that traditional technologies can achieve that. And this is where, of course, the science of microrecycling that we're developing will allow us to lay the foundation for what future manufacturing could look like in a decentralized way. And what you're seeing in this diagram here is that lateral connectivity between a whole range of different kinds of industries, whether somebody needs metallics or indeed ceramic materials for different applications, or indeed plastics. It's all possible to harness a whole range of different kinds of waste resources. So for example, we've been working with end users like Mirvac, who then have taken on our technology and have taken on the products. And I'll show you some pictures before we wrap up this evening. But I think it is important then, therefore, if we are showing that we can bring a lot of these kinds of products into the real world, then we need to, of course, partner with industries. And yes, we need to do pilot trials, and we need to then continue on that journey where we can deploy these technologies and work with end users to show that ultimately the products that we make are fit for purpose. They have the right engineering properties for a particular application. And that's the important question there. It's about showing that we can reduce our carbon footprint by localizing these solutions, by taking waste materials and putting them back into practical application. So we don't have to always rely upon importing products over long distances. Imagine if you could actually take a lot of your plastics and you could take that and put it back into production again and again. It just means that we have to know how we're going to achieve that from a practical point of view. And of course, we need to have end users who are prepared to give it a go and supporting new technologies and new solutions. So that's really where our vision lies with Smart Center, is to be able to, of course, create these local opportunities, and so that ultimately we decentralize the way we think about manufacturing and transformation of waste into high quality materials and products, enabling, of course, that value creation. So we need to rethink what a business model may well look like in the future so that we can actually support local economies and jobs. And this is why, of course, we need to show that it is possible that these kinds of solutions that we're developing in Australia, of course, then ultimately can be deployed anywhere in the world. That's where microfactories could work in a global value chain. So this is an example of one of our microfactories at UNSW. We've got 2 microfactories, and we are certainly looking at all of the things and showing that it is feasible to harness our end-of-life products, but also at the same time show that they can be converted into highly engineered, manufactured products by transformation of waste into value. So in this case, plastics coming from e-waste, you see these broken parts and components on the left-hand side of your screen. We have then converted those into plastic filaments. Plastic filaments made from recycled plastics have to do their job. And the job in this particular case, if they are being used for 3D printing, that they have to actually still deliver quality products, the quality finished products, which means from our point of view, making sure that we've generated quality filaments that can actually print quality products is important. Only then can we say that we've been truly successful in delivering value-added products. So you can also see that what we are doing as a result of that is therefore rethinking how we're going to, of course, transform the whole sort of underpinning economics. If we can decentralize these kinds of solutions, we don't have to transport these waste resources over long distances. We don't have to bring in filaments over long distances, which means ultimately we can save on the cost of transport and of course, reducing our carbon footprint. So these are the kinds of strategies, of course, are important in a holistic way when we think about our waste resources. And of course, in this case, yet another example of where we've transformed our waste glass and textiles, and we've created these green ceramic products that allow us, again, to achieve similar sort of goals of showing that it is possible to make, a hard surface In this case, it contains both glass and textiles for various applications in a built environment setting. What do I mean by that? Here's where one of our collaborative partners, collaboration with Mirvac, has shown that a lot of these hard green ceramic products that you're seeing some in these pictures have indeed been put into actual apartments so that we can get end users, people like Mirvac, who put them into application to give us that feedback and to tell us how these products are performing. That's important, whether we're putting into flooring application or in some cases where you're seeing here with the kitchen applications in the splashback that you see in this particular case. So ultimately, it is important that we all look at circularity and circular solutions as not just converting like for like, but rather looking at how we might be able to recycle, reform, put products into application and think in a much bigger way about sustainability and the actions that we can all take together, which is about ultimately whether it's a local council that's collecting waste or whether it's producers and designers who are thinking about manufacturing and designing products. And indeed, all of us as end users, we can make choices. So we of course have seen examples of where it is possible to imagine a future where the choices we make, whether we're businesses or indeed offices, we can actually start to imagine as individuals that we can play our part in knowing and really understanding that ecosystem and that landscape so that we can actually, I think Vanessa talked about, having transparency in our supply chains and our materials and knowing where our materials are coming from so that when you go out to source products, it's not just superficially kind of being told that, oh, well, it doesn't come in plastic packaging, but really understanding the full impact of how a particular material or a product has been manufactured. And of course, what happens to a lot of products at the end of their lives. So it's understanding circular solutions by all of us playing a part and working together in a collaborative manner. So microfactories that we're developing are really all about contributing to circular economy in a way that we can show sustainability in action, and we can indeed showcase that it is possible to actually revolutionize recycling by producing cost-effective green materials. And the point about decentralization is that we see these waste microfactories as basically providing opportunities to generate jobs and of course boost local economies by creating products that we all can use in our everyday lives. So whether these are products in our homes or indeed in our manufacturing solutions, we can imagine a future where we are sourcing products that are made from recycled content by reducing our dependency on virgin feedstock and really enabling our planet to thrive by recognizing that we all need to be fair and create jobs and ensure that everyone on this planet can actually thrive. So we need to create affordable solutions that everybody can actually find, as something that they are committed to. So our solutions have to be such that ultimately we are looking to regenerate our materials and our products from a whole range of different types of waste resources, so that ultimately we can imagine a future where we don't see any waste as actually a waste, but rather a resource that is simply waiting to be harnessed. So on that note, I want to say that I really admire the work you guys do and really appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you this evening. I look forward to our conversation. I think we all need to work together to be able to deliver a planet that is going to be fair and equitable for everyone, for all people across the world. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak here this evening.
Thank you, Professor Veena, for explaining so eloquently how waste can be seen as a precious resource through the innovative recycling technologies you and your teams have developed. I was particularly interested in how microfactories allow the delocalization of production, and also obviously the associated community impact element, which really enables us to empower communities to take charge of their waste solutions. So now we have an exciting Q&A section where you will be able to ask Professor Veena some questions. Facilitating this section, we have Joel Lindsay, Young Professionals representative on the UNAA National Board and Young Professionals Queensland Committee President. Over to you, Joel.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Vanessa, and thanks, Professor Veena, for that awesome introduction. This is now the interactive part of the evening. We want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions and comments. We want to get your thoughts. We organize these events to make sure that our young professionals across the country get access and can talk to, the real leaders in the field across industries. And we have definitely one of Australia's leading minds in many fields, I might say. I'm gonna ask a few quick questions that I'm just interested in, and I'll abuse my position here to ask my own questions, but then we really want to hear from you guys. So in the Q&A chat, put your questions in. You can upvote other questions you want to hear answered. But I'll kick it off with Professor Veena. In preparing for tonight, I watched the Australian story that we shared, and I hope everyone else did because it's quite incredible, and some other interviews with you. And one recurring theme is that you are quite humble, which is sort of annoying because you've done so much and achieved so much. And we wanted to really spruik that this evening with you and the event. So for those of you who don't know, and we obviously can't capture all your incredible achievements in one short bio or intro, Eureka Prize winner, which is basically the Nobel Prize for Science in Australia. A presenter on ABC's New Inventors, which I did not know until organizing this. That's awesome. I remember that show, might be showing my age, but I remember that show when I was quite little. Maybe too young to really engage, but I watched the episodes back. They're really cool. And obviously a laureate professor at UNSW for all your incredible work. So no need to be humble because you're incredible, and thank you for being here. My first question though, and this is something that really interested me watching your Australian story, is clearly an incredible drive for sustainability. And as a UNYP member who talks about the SDGs all the time behind me, we're really interested in where that drive comes from. So I'd love to get a quick introduction to your story and where your drive for sustainability and passion for recycling and learning comes from.
Yeah, no, thanks, Joel, and that's very kind of you to acknowledge some of the work that I've done. I think to me, I just see it as the fact that we all as human beings are very passionate about things, and I think to me it's important that when we think about how we want to kind of make a difference to the world that we live in, that we do bring together both our heads and our hearts. There's the side that says we've got a technical sort of inclination to study a particular field, whatever that might be. It doesn't have to be science or engineering, or it could be in the creative areas of arts, or it could be in business. I think to me that's one side of who we are as human beings. But I think the other more important side that sustains, I guess, all of us is our heart and our passion. And when you actually do find what it is that you're really passionate about, and it is important that you do that, and you don't have to solve the world's problems yourself. You bring together colleagues and friends and all of that. But I think we all need to every so often stop and ask ourselves, what is it that we actually want the world to look like? What is that legacy that we know we can make it happen? But again, not thinking that it's got to be done ourselves. And I think this is where, of course, where you work and where your friends and how you bring together change and action and the kinds of things you guys are doing this evening. I think to me, all of that just goes to show that it is really important that, again, we bring together both our head and our heart, and we have to, because it's never going to be an easy journey. There's going to be ups and downs. So it's always good to be driven by both your passion and your technical field of expertise.
Yeah, and thank you, because we're all benefiting from your drive tonight. I've got a quick question here from Mariella, and this question I'm also interested in. You mentioned in the Australian story, you've been working for quite a long time with industry to, sort of, in some cases, push and pull them to get, really across the idea that you can change your feedstock to be more renewable, reusable products, etc. And I assume a lot of that is, misconception about what is profitable, how much this stuff might cost, how it affects the bottom line. Mariella has asked, have you seen any examples of manufacturing companies forgoing their profit margin to implement a truly green solution?
Yeah, look, I mean, we've got to also be practical and realistic, right? In the sense that if we are thinking about in the long term, how are we going to sustain jobs? I mean, even an organization that is a not-for-profit, has to pay the wages for people that they employ. So I think to me, it's important that we keep that in mind, that for any organization thinking in a long term about what is it that they are all about is, yes, it's not always about profits. And in fact, on many occasions, you don't want the bottom line, the profit margins always to be the driver, because then you will get it wrong. And in fact, you will always be in that situation where you will never embrace innovation. If you always look at making money on day one, I think that's also a wrong approach. So I think to me, there is that balance where lots of organizations I partner with do understand the long-term journey that we are on. And many of them that I've mentioned today, and I've shown you some examples, are truly with us on that journey. And I think to me, it is about a journey that says that if we are making that transition and making that switch across into looking at new materials, new feedstocks, and wanting to be more and more sustainable, then I think looking at how we might be able to collaborate and work together. And that's why I use the term lateral integration, so that you can partner with somebody else who might have a waste resource that actually might be a fabulous feedstock for your business. And I think to me, what we've shown examples today of waste textiles coming in the form of green ceramics means that we can actually imagine a future where the partnership is there truly between an organization that's got waste textiles, but then can actually provide that as part of a microfactory solution to manufacture green ceramics. But then again, it's not enough to just make those green ceramics. You have to actually then make sure that there is a business that's willing to use it. So I think to me, that is really that important point around that lateral integration and collaboration. And we just like to see ourselves as, in a way, making that science happen in the first place. Of course, that's our core role. But the other side of what we do is that collaborative effort in where Smart Center is allowing our science and technology to come to life, knowing full well that we're not the business people who will deploy these practical solutions. We need to partner with those businesses that truly are actually excited about sustainability and are excited about innovative ideas and solutions.
Awesome. You mentioned that you're not the business people who are going to be developing these things, but Miranda asks, has there been any thought to where these factories could be located and how much would they cost to set up and operate in Australia? And to that, I'd like to add my much less intelligent question of how long until I can take my mattress or jeans that don't fit down to my local microfactory and dump it into the big bucket that turns it into the nice tiles?
Yeah, look, the short answer is we actually showed on that ABC doco, the Australian story, that our green ceramics microfactory, it's the first one outside UNSW. We've been doing our own demonstration microfactory at UNSW, of course, but to be able to show that we can have a microfactory that actually runs in a commercial setting is what we've just recently started earlier this year, and that is out at Cootamundra, a regional town close to Canberra. And I think to me, that's an example of a microfactory can be deployed in any place. It's about evaluating what those supply chains might look like. So you're absolutely right. You can indeed have, and in fact, our industry partner out in Cootamundra has got exactly that. He's got a mattress recycling business and he goes around collecting mattresses. And so I think to me, whether it's your mattresses or your jeans or whatever the case might be, that first step of making sure that it is being processed appropriately in a way that then ultimately will end up in a microfactory, and therefore it can be converted into a green ceramic of the right quality. That's important. It's not about just kind of whipping something together. It's about ultimately creating a product that is engineered and manufactured, and it's going to be fit for purpose.
Thank you. I think that leads into an interesting thought I had about, I think myself personally, and a lot of people who, trying to get involved in the whole being self-sustainable and trying to close the loop as much as possible and our own waste and our own, footprint on this planet. I think a lot of us are quite concerned, and this might be because of, the War on Waste, ABC TV show, which you're obviously a part of. When we talk about recycling, we talk about, oh, I took my stuff or I put it in the yellow recycling bin. I took my old mattress and washing machine to the council centre. When that is recycled, can we be quite confident that in Australia, at least, what we are putting in recycling, what we're taking to those centres is actually recycled? Or are we not quite there with what we put in there, becomes a pretty tile as part of your microfactory?
Yeah, that's a good question, Joel, because I think ultimately, I'm not saying that we are, there. I mean, obviously, we have a long way to go on this journey, right? And that's why we call it a journey. And we know that we all have to work together. So therefore, the answer is really you have to ask those questions. And in the interest of transparency, ask the questions to your service provider. Maybe the local council can tell you a little bit more about what they do with it. And you then need to ask a question, okay, well, whoever is your service provider, what do they do with it? So I think, again, in this entire conversation, it is about that supply chain. So ultimately, where does this material end up? Does it end up in landfill? I had a conversation with a business guy who approached us yesterday, Port Macquarie, right? And again, small business making a really essential product, but is not convinced that his waste is actually being recycled, even though that material that he's using is highly valuable. But from his point of view as a small business, he has to rely upon the service provider. So I think, to me, that is an important conversation to have, that we can show that in our local communities, what might be seen as a waste that's discarded out of one business can actually be transformed in a useful way into creating another product. Doesn't have to be that same product, could be something entirely different, but it's that valuable material that was used in the first place. And remember, that guy in the first instance has paid a lot of money to purchase that feedstock. And therefore, how do you actually harness the value out of that feedstock means that, again, it's that collaborative effort. And therefore, we all need to be asking those questions. And I asked the same question of him yesterday. Okay, so where does it finally end up, right? And I think we all need to be asking those questions.
I completely agree. And when you talk about we need to be asking these questions, you mentioned council. Sandy has asked, as a professional in circular economics, what has your experience been in communicating with the greater community, this exact concept of circular economies? It seems to Sandy it's still a bit underground and people have not really heard of it. I know anecdotally, the War on Waste program at ABC has been quite massive and monumental in terms of shifting perception about waste and recycling. But Sandy would like to know, how do you approach communication of this to educate and encourage uptake of a circular economy?
Yeah, look, I mean, I get asked to, do a lot of talks from large cities to small regional centers. And I think, it is important when you think about how this is communicated is in the context of your audience, right? What you might be talking about in a large metro area would be quite different to what you might be talking about in a regional center. And I think, to me, understanding what matters to the local community is important, so that you can put it in the context of, okay, well, if you've got a lot of, waste plastics and waste wood and batteries, how are you going to do that? You don't have to solve all the problems yourself. Partner with local communities or the city that happens to be next door. So earlier this year, I was speaking in a small shire called Coolamon Shire. I had never heard of them till I was invited to speak there. I think, to me, that's a good example where they were excited about a lot of these green ceramics. They don't have to manufacture themselves, but it so happens that the town, Coolamon, is not that far away. And so ultimately, we all have to sort of look towards where, we solve that problem by not just looking at it, what we can do locally ourselves, but then imagining a regional solution. So also sourcing as much as possible local businesses and enabling local businesses to become more sustainable by our purchasing powers. So again, it's back to that point of all of us doing our homework and asking whether, just like we take interest in where our food comes from, have we supported local growers? In the same way here, we've got to think about supporting local manufacturers who are manufacturing high quality goods and asking those questions as much as possible. So we all do the right thing when it comes to supporting UN SDGs and how we get there collectively.
No, it's a really awesome message, and thank you for that. I'll go to a special one from across the world. Julia from London is really keen to know whether your microfactories are running on renewable energy for the complete eco package.
Yeah, look, I mean, that's a really good question, because I mean, for us, that's an obvious thing that we are doing in terms of thinking about how our industry partners are actually deploying renewable energy on their site. So in fact, our steel making partner we work with here in Newcastle, which is for Julia's benefit, you know, about 200 kilometers north of Sydney. You know, that's a great example where, you know, they're sourcing renewable energy, and with our green steel technology in you know, bringing in also renewable materials with, you know, as I was explaining, replacing coal and coke with rubber tires. What we are hoping is to have both renewable energy, of course, which they already are deploying on their side, but also equally importantly to think about a whole materials revolution. So we can of course enable businesses and help. Yes, renewable energy is something that they take responsibility for in their hands, and that's not something that we can do anything other than sort of show that it is possible, depending on the size of the modules and the operations specific for their site. But the materials revolution in thinking about renewable materials is what we are, of course, bringing to the table. So I think we have to, again, think holistically. Yes, it's about the energy. Yes, it's about materials.
Awesome. Miranda wants to know, funding opportunities is, you know, with the success and the recent, I guess, notoriety that you're enjoying from stuff like War on Waste and Australian Story, is the money sort of coming in for this technology? And also, I was really curious, did the end of the Australian Story episode sort of finalizes on you had to produce that tile to satisfy the grant conditions? My question personally is, was that a success? Did it all come through? And Miranda wants to know, is there funding around for these microfactories? And is it really like a collaboration that's needed between government and industry?
Yeah, look, that's a good question, and indeed I will acknowledge the grant that supported that journey with those green ceramic tiles through the Office of the Chief Scientist and Engineer here in New South Wales through their physical sciences funding, and I guess absolutely from our perspective, these are all important support mechanisms. That journey of commercialization for us certainly would not have been possible otherwise. And I think that is probably the case for a lot of inventors, right? And you know, when we look at support, we have to look at both support where government's got programs, and I think, as we know, that there's a lot of focus on supporting and boosting manufacturing and looking at recycling opportunities in Australia, and of course a lot of these grants are there as collaborative grants where research, industry, government, all of these have to come together, and ours was exactly that with our green ceramics microfactory, where the state government here in New South Wales supported that. And at the same time, of course, we've got industry partners who are taking up the technology. So for us at UNSW, it certainly would not have been possible without that kind of support. And yes, we're well and truly on our way. And super excited. The fact that Mirvac has taken on some of these products is a real world test for what's possible. So it's important to do all the engineering testing, but it's also equally important that end users are taking on these products and you know, testing it out in their own conditions. So I think all of this has to come together, and we do need collaboration, as I mentioned earlier.
Thank you for mentioning collaboration. It's one of, like, you know, things we're trying to really push across with the SDGs and the work we're doing. I'm going to try and combine a question that I had with a question from Sydney. I noticed by accident when I was doing some research for this, you're also presenting at the Sydney Morning Herald Green Conference, I think in a few weeks' time or a month or so. So I'm really curious what you're saying to big business at this point, because you have a product, it works, everybody's on board. We know waste is an issue. We know that you have a very viable feedstock and a viable, you know, solution for a lot of these waste issues. So I'm personally curious what you're telling business and finance now, and do they get it still after all this time? And Sydney wants to know, on the same theme, is there any upcoming regulations being brought in to encourage these uptakes? And I guess that really speaks to, like, is the industry, behind it yet, or is there still a way to go?
Yeah, look, I mean, I certainly have to give credit to a lot of industries who are talking to us that, they get it. Absolutely. They get it that this is the right thing to do. This is responsible manufacturing, that where we've got the capacity in our hands as businesses who are interested in recycling, manufacturing, and collaboration across all these different areas, to actually look at this as a whole new opportunity. And I think this is where, of course, when we think about what we are at the cusp of here, what we're sitting at the cusp of is a brand new materials revolution. And we can be really clever about it. And this is what businesses know, that to be able to bring innovation to life, we do have to look at new ways of creating value from our waste. It is certainly not business as usual. And that's an important message. And I think absolutely businesses do get it. I think from my perspective, the ability to actually show that science and technology and engineering develops, that foundation. So we always have to show that right here in Australia, we've got leadership when it comes to science and technology in this space, developing new science. And in our case, like we were talking earlier around the Australian Research Council funding for microrecycling science is really one example where the foundation of science has to be developed. Not everything is known right from day one, but that's a good challenge to have. And I think, to me, that's what I thrive in. And I think, to me, a lot of our industry partners who love the notion that we can be the first in the world to make certain things happen, I think that's a pretty cool thing to be able to tell the rest of the world that, hey, you know what, we did this, and as end users, we can be partnering in this space. So I think that's really where it's important that all businesses see this as a fantastic new economic opportunity, as well as an environmentally responsible thing to do.
Speaking of leadership and opportunities, somebody's asked what to do if you want to get into this industry, because what you said is so inspiring, that they want to change career right now. Don't have a background in engineering like you do, or science. Maybe like me, you're an arts grad. Is that experience needed, or is research the only way to get into this exciting industry?
Yeah, no, look, I think there are many, many pathways to getting into this kind of work. Obviously, think about, where you might have, joint degrees, where you might bring in your creative side, bring in your business side of things, and take on, like in our case, we're looking at materials science, for example. I think to be able to have, degrees that allow you to take advantage of what you're passionate about, but also build what you might be able to do. We've had some of my students who've done, for example, architecture degrees in that space, where they've come in from a completely different background, but then have said, look, I need to learn a bit more about material science so I can actually push forward in this space. I think is a way to go. Don't see your degree and your experience as a disadvantage. In fact, I'd say, bring that forward as an advantage, so that you can have that interdisciplinary thinking. So you can bring in design, for example, from what you might have studied before, and creative thinking, built environment, all the things that I've talked about, bringing in some of that and learning some of these other emerging ideas when it comes to material sciences is a nice way to imagine, because after all, sustainability in action is exactly that. We all need to act, and we all can bring, as I was saying earlier, our passion and our skills to the table. But it also means that we all need to learn. I had to learn a whole new sort of world of how designers think about using our products. And I think, to me, I was excited. I think I learned a lot about how people from the world of design, are actually looking at some of our green ceramics and using that. So I think, to me, that's exactly why it's an exciting future, where UN SDGs really can actually be achieved, and we can work together in saying, look, if I'm a designer, if I'm someone who is creating a whole new built environment solution, a community center, I can then access some of these products, but get a lot of that know-how before you make decisions about where you want to go with it.
Yeah, awesome. There's a question about recent success stories in promoting circular economy, like, what are state and federal governments doing? I might roll it into a question about the budget. Obviously came out last night, the federal Australian budget. I noticed something about a $2 billion modern manufacturing initiative. Are you happy with the way we're going in this direction? Was the budget a massive success story for what you'd like to see in the industry?
Oh, look, I think it's a fantastic thing when we talk about modernization of manufacturing and recycling and thinking about how circularity kind of will logically fit into that. I've been talking to so many different businesses who are in the space of recycling and manufacturing and can see a future where, as a country, we are showing our commitment towards protecting our environment, protecting our jobs and people, and really showing that it is possible to have manufacturing and creating those new jobs, and at the same time incorporating sustainability and innovation into our thinking. And that's exactly what we need. And I know a lot of companies who are excited about some of the new directions that they can take, coming to us to take advantage of some of the new science, that we're developing at SMART, but also then harnessing a lot of the power of that science to show that they can actually be bold, really bold and creative in the way they think about new businesses. I mean, that example of our industry partner out at Cootamundra, who is in the business of collecting mattresses, but now thinking about what that future green ceramics microfactory that he set up out of Cootamundra could be doing. So I think to me, it's all reflecting that if your heart is in the right place, you've got all the right support when it comes to science, technology, business. I think in a collaborative way, as a country, we can actually, collectively do so much for our environment and for our people.
That's awesome to hear. And I'm really happy that, everyone who's here tonight gets it. You get it. Governments are starting to get it. I have a quick question about economics from Anonymous. We're talking about, especially in the Australian story, that we're at a point now where people and business are starting to see that this is a viable alternative to use recycled materials and feedstocks. Are costs currently at a state that circulation, for example, copper, is profitable at scale, or is there still a gap that needs to be subsidized?
Yeah, look, I mean, with every technology, and I think to me that is the important point to bear in mind, that this is very early days when we're starting to talk about microfactories and creating value-added green materials. How do you actually think about your business model in a context like this? Is to say, it's not just about the cost of making that metallic alloy, but rather saying, okay, if I've got all of access to all this e-waste, should I be actually seeing the cost of disposal or transportation or shipping it somewhere else as part of my calculation? And I should be looking at that, because that then allows you to take account of all the externalities and say, okay, well, but if I take all of those factors into account by setting up a decentralized solution, a microfactory, for instance, if I were to create, even if it is a small quantity of let's say metals like copper and aluminium and a lot of different kinds of really valuable metals. I know from even the visit that I had last week when I was in Newcastle that there are opportunities to harness things like green aluminium that we're producing out of our waste materials. So I think to me, that scale at which you make it is about the scale that is thinking about, as I was saying before, not just always about economies of scale, but it's got to be about economies of purpose. So if the purpose is, and the market and the end user demand is of a certain scale in Australia, and can we actually create supply chains locally where we can provide a lot of these materials of high quality? That's the important question. So that then means that you will be creating local jobs in those regions to participate in the supply chain locally. And I think to me, once you get that going, I think you will then be able to show that you've actually achieved a scale that is right for purpose.
I have to ask, you talked a lot about for the last for your career working on, producing green metals with, your feedstock of energy. Are you sort of annoyed that there's been a new push with renewable energy in the last few years? And they've sort of stolen the whole green manufacturing thing away with like wind and solar. Does it irk you that you made that term up, 15 years ago, and now they're using it like Grattan report and like green steel, green aluminium is now the big flavor of the day? Sure, that must annoy you at some point.
Yeah, no, it's quite interesting about green steel, isn't it? Yeah, in the early days when we were starting to talk about it, and of course now that we're showing in practice that the kind of things we're talking about with green steel and using waste tires in the process making steel. I think to me it's much more important that we are really focused on the goal and the journey that we're on. And if we've got partners like Molycop in Newcastle who are really committed to doing it, I think to me, yep, you can call it green steel or whatever. But I think to me, if we can actually show the runs on the board and show that it is possible that you can have a company in Newcastle that's partnering with us to create, and to produce green steel, and to do it in a way that we're also recycling waste tires as an example. And yeah, of course, we have a long way to go on that journey. We're not saying that we've completely eliminated the need for coal and coke. I'd like to think that we're on that journey, and we will absolutely get there for electric arc furnace steelmaking technology, where we're on with our polymer injection technology. And I think to me, it's far more important that we remain focused on what we want to achieve and support that endeavor that our industry partners on that journey. But also equally importantly, never lose sight of the fact that science, can really only create value for our world and for our environment if we can actually translate it into practice.
Awesome. And to bring it local, I guess, Shubhankar is really interested to know, is there more work to be done in categorizing and collecting household waste? He mentions organic and inorganic waste is segregated and collected in India. It's refuse and recyclables in the US, etc. Are we doing enough? What's the next step in us as Australians, and local council runs collection, as you know? What's the next in the household rubbish game?
Yeah, look, I mean, certainly looking at where low-hanging fruit is. You look at whether it's our homes or our offices. There's some things that we all have in common these days, as, for example, printers, electronic equipment get more and more common. We want to be able to have councils collecting, and we see that on curbside collection days, that we see a lot of people throwing away their old obsolete printers, for example, right? And our casings are old, I guess, casings in an electronic system where it's good quality plastic. But we don't really stop and think that good quality plastic can actually be converted into something useful. And I referred to that in my talk this evening around creating value from that plastic that comes from electronics, like plastic casings that can then be converted quite readily into plastic filaments fit for 3D printing. I mean, these are all examples of things that, local councils can encourage, collection in a way that people are encouraged to bring that in by showcasing at those local councils that are microfactory that can produce, for example, plastic filaments and do 3D printing is absolutely doable in your local area. And I think to me, that's important. We've partnered with local councils here in Sydney where they've gone off and purchased their own 3D printers. And they love the fact that they can come to us, and partner with us in that endeavor. So I think to me, there are lots of examples of things that can be done in partnerships with people, councils, local governments play such an important role. And in many cases doing such a fantastic job in encouraging, new practices. And I think to me, that's where we all need to participate as citizens.
Thank you. I personally am very much looking forward to my local neighborhood microfactory, although I do struggle to walk down the block with my compost bin, but we're getting there, right? We're all trying. Thank you very much for that. It's an awesome conversation. But before I let you go from this Q&A session, we wanted to quickly do something a bit different and ask everyone in the audience, if you're so inclined, to quickly share a tip, something that you do, something you've learned, something you've heard, or even something you've been inspired by tonight in the chat. And I want to hear tips and tricks that you are personally implementing to make your, existence more sustainable. It can be anything, it can be small, doesn't matter what it is, put it in the chat. And we've tried this before and we found, people don't think that what they're doing is quite revolutionary or not, as exciting as what Professor Veena is doing, but every little bit helps, obviously. So we're really keen to see what people are doing in the, in their own personal lives. And on that, Professor Veena, I normally always ask, what's your one key takeaway that you want everybody here to leave with? But I might get you to kickstart our chat by saying, what's one thing you've recently learned and that you're doing at home now to, reduce your impact on the amount of waste you're producing, or what's one thing you've taken up to increase the amount of circular economy that's spinning around your home?
Oh, look, I mean, I could give you lots of examples, but I think I'll pick up one that I absolutely love doing, because to me, at a personal level, I feel that it's just something that it's so easy to do. And I know it sounds really trivial, but let me start with something that we all have in common. A pair of old shoes, right? And whatever your old shoes are, whatever your sort of, for different sort of thing, whether it's your formal sort of pair of shoes or whether it's just the casual that you might have, I think to me, getting those old pair of shoes repaired, whip them out, they're probably sitting there with a broken heel or a sole or whatever, take it to your local repair shop. If you don't have a local shop, go to the suburb next door, and get them repaired. And the nice thing about an old pair of shoes is that they are so comfy, right? so I do that all the time. And I think to me, my local shoe repairer guy, who's actually close to a station near my home, just loves the fact that I keep coming back to get the sole repaired. And by the time I've taken it through 5 or 10 times, I've won, not thrown it away. So I've made my product last longer. So that's a classic example of sustainability, I guess, in action, and we can all do that. So absolutely get those repaired. Take it to your local repairer, who of course then you're also supporting. We talk about supporting local businesses, and you could apply the same thing to your old clothes as well, right? Some of those old clothes that you might need to get them repaired. So I think to me, it's those basic things that we all use, our shoes and our clothes, that you could extend the life of some of these products and don't have to buy as much then. And you know what, might save you a bit of money as well in the long term.
But importantly, that life is not infinite, and at some point they'll have to go in the Professor Veena shredder at some point and become something else entirely.
Yeah.
Awesome, and great to see people putting in their tips and tricks. I'm loving cutting up t-shirts for especially my tomatoes, which I can't make grow, but I am trying with the little strips of fabric. That's a great one. For all of you who had questions that we didn't get time to, a few of them I mercy skipped over because they are actually answered in the Australian Story video, particularly one about how the tyres work for steel manufacturing. The Australian Story is quite fantastic, and Professor Veena almost has 1 million views on that video, and she has some very, very enthusiastic YouTube fans in the comments. Are quite entertaining to read through, so go check that out, have a look, and put a comment in there. I think I saw somebody who was quite upset that you haven't won a Nobel Peace Prize yet.
Oh dear.
I think you definitely deserve more prizes, but the Peace Prize is maybe a bit outside of recycling, but definitely more prizes. And someone mentioned you should be, I think, getting as much as the Kardashians, which I wholeheartedly endorse. Thank you for your questions, guys. I hope the answers were awesome. And thank you, Professor Veena, for being here in that awesome chat. I had a great time. I learned a lot. And I apologize for indulging myself with so many questions that I wanted to hear answered, because I'm so interested in your work and your topic and your career. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joel, and I'd like to convey my thanks to each and every one of you for really coming up. I'm seeing as a lot of things have come through the chat box. We really appreciate the passion and the enthusiasm that everyone brings to this kind of conversation. And I think that's so inspiring to really have an opportunity to listen to what you guys are also doing. So thank you for the opportunity. And I'd like to convey my thanks to you, Joel, and Vanessa and Jackie for really putting this together, and to the audience for taking the time to be here tonight. So thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. That's it, folks. To close, I'm going to pass back over to President Vanessa, who's going to quickly wrap up the event and talk about the next events we have coming up in series. So thank you, and pass back to her.
Thank you, Joel, and a massive thank you to Professor Veena for joining us tonight. Your work is truly remarkable, and I'm sure I speak for everyone when I say that we can't wait to see what you do next. Thank you to everyone who participated in the Q&A and for sharing also what actions you are taking on to be more sustainable in your day-to-day lives. We will be sharing a bit of a summary of these actions post the event together with a recording, so it will be easy for everyone to find these and actually start doing them in their everyday life. Before we wrap up, I would like to just introduce and share some details about a 5-part mini-series we have starting in a couple of weeks. So each event will focus on a specific sustainable action and will be hosted online for everyone to access. As we touched on at the start of the evening, the aim of the series is to provide actionable takeaways that can be incorporated into your day-to-day lives. First up, in a couple of weeks, we have the Queensland team, led by Joel, with their event on reef sustainability. In July, the Western Australia team will share insights about how to influence sustainable business. The Victoria team will then host August's event on fashion, and the ACT team will run an event on energy and water sustainability in September. In October, the New South Wales team will host the final event of the series on how behavioral sciences can influence a more sustainable lifestyle. You can find out more about the event series on our website and through our social media channels on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. And if you haven't had the chance to take the How Sustainable Am I quiz yet, I encourage you to do so before Queensland's event. If you're keen to stay involved with the UNAA Young Professionals and become a champion of sustainable development, you can also become a member of our network. Thank you all for joining us. We hope you have spent an enriching hour with us and have been able to take away actions which you can apply to be more sustainable in your everyday lives. Have a good rest of your evening, and we look forward to seeing you all at the next event.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone.
Thanks all. Bye.